Welcome to the virtual compound. Today, we're giving you our best advice in finding your dance compound. We're talking finding a studio, what to look for, and general practices to implement to ensure that you're the best dance mom or dad that you can be. Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hi.
Let's see. It is 4:47 on a Sunday, and it's looks like the marine layer is coming in on the west coast here.
It is 7:47 p.m. and unfortunately it was 52 degrees today. It was in the 70s yesterday.
That
It was 52 today. It was real
oh,
cold.
that, that sounds terrible.
I know, and we should solidly be out of this weather right now.
Okinawa. It is 8:48 in the morning. It's 77 degrees and it is cloudy, but it'll probably burn off soon.
Yeah.
It should be a nice day.
How's rainy season going for you so far?
It's not very rainy
Oh, all right.
thus far. I mean, knock on wood.
Right.
But
Right.
it's not very rainy. You remember wait, I don't know if Katie was here. I think it was Lacey. The summer you left, Katie, it rained like all summer. Like
all the time.
No.
Yeah.
It was the wettest like summer in like recorded history or something like
Oh
that.
my goodness.
It was
Yes.
insane.
It was
And
I was
now
not
we,
well.
it was not great. And now we're like in a drought.
Oh.
Which is good. Well,
not out there though.
Because they stored up all the rain.
Right.
It was pretty rainy in 2022. I was really upset that like every other year we were there, it was like rain all summer. It started in like late July and then went through the following March or something in 2020 to 2021. It was really, really bad. That summer was great.
I do remember being really sad that it ended up being so cold right before we left because we didn't leave until June. But we ended up having to keep out like jeans and sweatery things for going outside, not just inside with the air conditioning that, that's going constantly. So I remember being sad about that, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's like slow.
Hold on. You're cutting out really bad. Can you try that again?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it better?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So Jeremy wanted this to be an episode. He specifically requested it. I think partially because of everything moving here and then some of the things that we found with our new studio and things about our old studio that would have been helpful to know. But let's start with finding a studio. Let's start right there.
Yeah, whether you are looking for a studio for the very first time, or like you may come across a situation in which it no longer fits you, or they can't adapt to your kid, or you're like us and you have to move. So we're going to figure out the best ways of finding a studio. I would say, just given my current situation, is don't limit yourself to your location as long as you have the ability to go. Now, that doesn't mean that I recommend you always look out for like a place that's over an hour away. But our current studio is about a 30-minute drive with 5 o'clock traffic. So it's not awful and it's worth it. I enjoy that, but we had other studios who were here very close. And as we go down this list, they didn't hit some of those points.
Yeah.
Or they might have hit those points, but the feel just wasn't the same. And so it's worth that drive for us. So that was my first recommendation is look around where you're living, where you're hoping to live, but don't limit yourself to just that area because you might find exactly what you need just a little bit farther away.
Well, and I think that that's kind of a really critical thing, especially if you're talking like dancing recreation or beginner versus like where our girls are, like our old ballet mistress at OSPA. She was telling me that her parents drove her like an hour and a half or 2 hours away, something ridiculous. And that's kind of required when you are at those higher levels or you're taking it more seriously. You're definitely going to have to travel if you're not in like a big metropolitan area, for example.
If we were to move back to Oklahoma, I'm sorry, people in Oklahoma, and Zoe wanted to progress where she was, she could not go to my studio. we would probably have to drive to either Tulsa or Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Neither of the studios, any of the studios in my hometown or the surrounding hometown, could meet the needs that she's at right now. But that might be because we would be moving there depending on our jobs. We may just end up moving closer to the studio. That's not for everybody, but that might be something we're looking for.
Well, I think that's something worth mentioning, especially for those that aren't necessarily on a coast and like the metropolitan areas are right there for those bases. But, you know, the Army and the Air Force and those families that do move often, and they have to consider like if your child is a dancer, and I don't know if this is the same with other sports because no one does anything else and as far as that goes in this house, but you know, for dance, because it is like the chosen passion and path for profession for at least one of our kids, with work being one place and dance, if they were hours apart, we would likely meet in the middle probably and move, like live in between, just because I mean it is such a requirement for drive, and it one of us is going to be driving every day that distance. It doesn't make sense to live near one or the other if you can live like equal distance between.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let's start with recreation versus an intense or pre-professional situation.
Amelia, I think that because you went the professional route, like dance wise,
Maybe you start this conversation.
yeah. Like, did you start out recreationally?
No.
Okay, so what did you start? And how old were
So,
you
yeah.
when you started?
I mean, everyone starts out recreationally, right? Like,
Especially if you're like 2.
because right, you have little girls, and even if you were a dancer or not, you put them in ballet or movement or whatever it's called, because it's one of the first things kind of that you can do activity wise with your kids, and it's really really cool that more and more we're seeing boys do it too.
Yeah.
Because you know they're starting at 2 or 3 years old, and it really is more like a movement, and it helps with their gross and fine motor skills, and they learn to hop and go from one leg to the other, and everybody starts out, you know, at that level. You're all the same. You're all doing this because your mom wants to get out of the house for an hour, and
have somebody else watch
if you have a
for
girl,
this.
your mom wants to see you in a tutu. Like, right? Like, mommy wants to see you glitter on stage.
Yes, very much.
Because not every little girl, but most little girls want to, like, you know, get a costume. That's kind of, you know, the impetus for most people starting. And then even beyond that, like, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, everyone is still kind of recreational. Like, your recreational dancing means you are never, this is not a career for you. This is not like a life dream. This is something that you really enjoy and you really like, but you are not in any way, shape, or form looking to turn this into something you will do as an adult. Beyond maybe just like a dance class because you enjoy it.
Right.
And then like a pre-professional or like non-recreational type path is like you want to do something with this in your adult life as a part of your career, or you want to keep dancing at a like very high level. And those are like the two different paths, and not to say that like one child is more talented than the other. That's just not how it is. I've seen like very immensely beautifully talented dancers that just purely do love dance, and they just want to stay recreationally, and they don't want to try out for summer intensives, and they don't want to you know, maybe they'll dance in college locally, but they're not trying to get like a degree in dance or a minor, and they're not pursuing a professional career. But typically around like 8, 9, 10-ish is when you kind of see the like paths diverge.
Split. Yeah.
The kids that are like, I mean, it almost kind of becomes like an obsession. They're like, I'm going to do this all the time. And is sleeping in the studio an option? Because
right. I know a couple who are definitely that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there are the kids that are like, I just love this. Like, it's fun. And this is my chosen like sport activity, whatever you want to call it. And yes, I want point shoes. And yes, I want to be in the ballet, but
I like
I'm
my
not
bed at
gonna
home
do this.
perfectly
Yeah,
fine.
like I like my bed at home. Like I love
We
my
had
dance friends. I love dancing, but I'm not gonna do this as a career.
Yeah.
and we had one at OSPA before we transitioned out who was like, yeah, I like dancing, but it's not my career. And she was really great to watch. Like I loved watching her. And that's a great example. And I think that there's a lot of, I think there's a lot that you get out of dance, even if it is recreation, that I wish I had been more consistent dancing growing up.
Yeah.
I always joke with my girls that my mom didn't love me enough to put me in ballet because I was never, ever, ever in a ballet class. And you guys, like, I will make you cringe with my hands, right? Like you guys have seen it, and I can't.
Yes, the dog
They
hands.
look like claws.
No,
Yeah.
they look like dogs. They look like you're trying to make little
dogs.
dog puppets. I love them.
Anyway,
It gets me every time.
like I'm not graceful, and I think that ballet specifically really does give girls a level of grace and poise that no other recreational activity does.
So we look at it from the recreational standpoint at this point. You are looking at things from a pre-professional standpoint. And Amelia is our helper in all the things, and she completes our triangle again.
Yes.
And helps
She's our
us
dance
figure
auntie.
out where we're
She
going.
tells us what to do.
And then the girls are super happy by the time they're done with it. So it all pays off. It works out perfect.
I mean, but you can also like tell your kids' passion in it pretty early. Like people always ask, they're like, "Oh, like, are you so excited Clara dances?" And like, she must be just like you and stuff like that. I'm like, that's exciting. But people are like, "Oh, she like, does it just bring back memories? Is she just like you?" I'm like, no.
No, she's not.
And they're like, "Oh, totally. Really? Yep.
100% not.
100%. Not even a little bit."
So avoid being a hopper.
Yes, Amelia said that because we might stay here. We might not. We don't know. We're still up in the air because retirement plans and such. And so I made a comment about like moving studios, like if we get a house or if we like move to a different area. And she's like, just wait. You don't want to be a hopper. So Amelia, like maybe you could explain that and like the reason behind it and why. And this goes more for those that are intense dancers versus recreational, because like they're very separate avenues.
Yeah. So, I mean, especially like locally in like local locations, the dance world can get pretty small, right? And when you get a new student, I mean, and not like a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, like, teenager, at your studio and, oh, where were you dancing before? Someone coming from out of state, oh, okay, well, your parents, their jobs moved or like life happened or whatever. But, oh, well, I was dancing here and it's 15 minutes down the road. Mm-hmm. Why'd you leave? And, oh, well, we didn't like it there. What didn't you like? Because as the studio owner, dance teacher, whatever, you'll know about that studio and you'll probably know the owner or director. You'll know of them and you'll know what kind of training they give. And your opinion might be positive or negative on it. And sometimes it could be like your dancer is moving from recreational to a more like pre-professional type career. And if your studio, the studio you move to is the more like, oh, well, you have a pre-professional program and this one didn't, and that's why we moved. Typically, that is like a perfectly fine and good answer. But like, I just didn't like it. Bad vibes, something like that. And then, next year you move again and you move again. Your kid kind of becomes known as the studio hopper, and you're difficult to please. You just kind of become known as this person that's like, no matter what, you're not going to be happy. And it's kind of easier to like keep those kids kind of at a distance, because as the studio owner, you don't really want to get your dance teacher. You don't really want to, catch the hard end of that stick. And especially if they come from a studio that's already, well known and has really good training, you kind of just start to wonder why they left. You don't want to give the impression that you're like perpetually unhappy. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying stick at a studio that's a bad situation for you, but if your child is receiving, good instruction and like safe and healthy instruction, And it's just kind of like, you just don't like it, or, you know, there's not really like a solid, like, the teachers were not encouraging healthy eating habits, and my child is like very susceptible to influence of their teachers, and so we had to move, something like that. You will be a studio hopper, and then your kid will kind of get, I'm not saying ignored, because a good teacher will never ignore any student, but like maybe just not like petted as much.
Right.
Well, and maybe not like the opportunities for
maybe not the
like bigger parts.
Yeah, because, but I mean, that's like in any business, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean,
you want somebody that they're going to want somebody they can rely on to put into parts for the next year, because whatever they are doing that year, they're not looking for that year. They're actually looking at like at the ages 10, like preteen into teen. They're not looking for the year they're in. They're looking for what they're going to be and what they can form them to be. You know, if you're mixing their styles, they might get confused or have a frustrating time transferring from one studio to the next when they are very specifically a certain style and technique. But that also means they're having to rebuild each year to get wherever it needs to be. And that means that it's going to be a full year before the artistic director or that teacher or whoever is going to really consider them for those parts in whatever dance or whatever productions they might have, because and you're almost setting them back. Now, like she said, if you're at a studio that is not able to fulfill the actual needs of your kid, they don't have a pre-professional and you're at that point when you need it, or they don't have a certain type of dance, you know, if your kid wants to do hip hop along with ballet and they don't offer hip hop, like those are understandable reasons to change. Some people though will do multiple studios for that. So like in New York, the Broadway Dance Center is open to anybody and you can take any class you want to take. In addition, you can go to your own studio because they don't have restrictions to that. So a lot of people would do that. They would go to their studios, then they would just hop over to Broadway and take whatever kind of class they wanted to take. And that was just supplementary because you could drop in. You didn't have to sign up for long-term classes.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense. And like being, especially in the foundational levels, hopping around, moving studio to studio just for the giggles, or just because, oh, my son's jujitsu is in the same shopping center or whatever. That can kind of hinder their development too, I think, because then they're like, oh, we aren't going over, you know, whatever. They didn't learn whatever move because I don't know the moves in the French. But let's say like they didn't learn fifth position, for example, and then, you know, they're pulled out from that studio before they learn that, and then they're in the next one and they're in like the beginning levels, but they've already gone over that like 3 weeks ago or months ago or whatever. And so I can understand how like those things would be missed too. But one of the really important pieces, like going along with that and being a studio hopper, that Amelia said to Abby when we left and we were looking for intensives is take this seriously because they're happy to take your parents' money. They're going to be happy to take your money. And if you're trying or not trying, that's not like, they really don't care. They're happy to take your money, but your parents care and they're doing this for you because this is what you want to do. So I thought that was like a gem of, you know, great advice.
So questions to ask when looking at new studios, when you've narrowed it down, don't necessarily narrow it down to a single one, maybe narrow it down to a couple, ask these same questions, do these same things to all of them, and kind of help you figure out the best way to go. One of them being styles, and that is the styles they offer and the style of technique, school of theory, whatever it is that you want to call it as the dance parent, that they do, and whether or not that matches with what your child has been doing, or if they're little, whether or not that even matters to you. If they're little, it may not matter to you. But if they've already been dancing for a while, having a change from Rad to Vaganova could be a really big
change in technique, right? Like to change, I mean, Rad to Vaganova is like pretty big. That's a pretty large change in technique, but also like Balanchine style to anything else. It really, like,
literally anything.
Or literally anything. It literally is just like a foundational like technique change. And there's not like one that is better than the other. Personally, I do not like Balanchine arms, but that's just like a personal stylistic preference. For the well-trained dancer, it's easy to change in between styles. But for a younger child, different technique styles would be kind of like a hard adaptation. But I mean, to be a true rad school, for example, like they have to go through a certification process. And so not every school can call themselves rad, Royal Academy of Dance, right?
Right.
And sticking within the same style is a good idea once they get older. So they don't have to like kind of relearn foundational technique things. But also as they get older, it is easier for them to change in between. It's like the preteen
Right.
type kids that are going to be like, wait, how do you want my arms in second now?
Yeah.
And because it's like relearning a muscle memory thing. But also changes can be good for them. Like Bourneville is a much like jumpier petit allegro style of dance. They focus a lot more on that. And for some dancers, that might be a really good change. So keeping within the same style is a good idea, but that's probably not why I would necessarily discount a studio. The only exception being rad, just because rad levels do testing. Right. And if you have a 16-year-old that's never in their entire dance career done rad and like had to test out of a level, that's kind of like whoa, like, because it's not just like, we're going to give you a class and you test. It's like, here are the very specific things that you need to memorize and then walk into the studio and perform in front of a level of evaluators.
Yeah. Actually, ABT did something similar to that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you have not grown up doing that, it's kind of like, what?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a shock to the system for the older kids. So I wouldn't, since we're simply talking about choosing studios, sticking with the same style would probably be like towards the bottom of my list of things to consider.
That makes sense. And as they grow, if they do summer intensives, while they may not be exposed to like a rad style year, they are going to probably be exposed to multiple different styles of dance, just because there's a lot of times, the summer intensives will bring in guest, not performers, what's the word? Instructors.
Guest teachers. Yeah.
Right. And they are going to be a mix of techniques and styles anyway. So they're giving them a chance, like sending them to camp in the summer is going to give them a little bit of ability to adapt to other things.
Well, and that's one thing to kind of like different styles. The girls' current studio actually has guest instructors throughout the year. I'd like to jump in and ask one question kind of relating to what Amelia just asked. I put it at the bottom, but I'm going to throw it in there. So you mentioned well-trained teachers. So for somebody like me, I didn't dance. And obviously I have you, but not everyone like me does have you, but they have a daughter like mine. How are you, like, what's the best way, or like some of the best questions, or the best way to root out like the teacher's training and what to look for?
So I would say that like someone in leadership at the studio needs to have had some sort of professional career. And not every single professional dancer is going to dance in New York. They're not going to dance in LA. They're not going to dance for like, a big named ballet company that like anyone off the street will recognize. Orlando Ballet, Houston Ballet, Kansas City Ballet Theater. Like, not everyone is going to dance for these big giant ballet names. And that's completely fine. They're still like a professional dancer, even if they danced at a smaller ballet company. But they need to have had someone in leadership needs to have had some sort of professional dancing career. They need to have experience in choreography at like some sort of professional or semi-professional level. And they need to have like a fairly extensive amount of teaching experience. Here in Okinawa, it's unique in the fact that like I was it. Like I'm was
Yep.
32, right? Like in the States, I would probably not, if Clara chose to, dance at a pre-professional level, I would probably not send her to a studio with a very, very young director or owner, because the experience teaching just isn't there. And managing like that level, like you kind of need to work your way up. You want to see that the like leadership of the studio started teaching and then they became ballet mistress or assistant director or like assistant stage director or something, and you want to see, because you should be able to read their bios,
Okay.
and you want to see that they like worked their way up, and that I'm not saying they need to be like 65 or 70 years old, but you do want to see that like career progression.
However, I'm going to throw in there, I'm not discounting that at all. But when put in a situation where you have limited stuff, don't discount the
No,
training that
and
they
I'm
have
I'm
had.
talking about like I am in Atlanta, Georgia, and I have
Right.
the option of 67,000 studios.
Right.
I'm not like I'm in like Castroville, Texas. I'm just gonna say that because it's the first small town that came to my head. And there's 2 options. You know what I mean? I'm not saying like this isn't a case where you like kind of the world is your oyster. There's a whole lot of options for you to filter through.
Right.
If you are looking for like really solid training for your dancer, recreationally or not, they need to have had some sort of professional experience, because that is how they're going to get your dancer
to that level.
Right? Like, someone without professional experience very rarely is going to be able to get your dancer to a professional level. And then the dance teachers, this is like the biggest thing for me. You don't want all of the dance teachers, their resume to be like, I went to this dance school, I graduated high school, now I am a teacher.
Right.
Like that. A lot of studios do keep some teachers in house, but you want to have seen them gone and like, I danced here, I danced in college, or I danced like I danced on Disney cruises, or like I did something else and then like I circled back to come to teach here.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like I graduated high school, and then I became a teacher, and that's all of their teaching staff. You don't want to see that, because that means that they have not launched anyone.
Well, and it also means that they haven't had exposure to different styles, different techniques, different ways of instruction that are going to help them better instruct your child. And that's kind of like across the board. And what you guys were touching on, like just because someone hasn't danced professionally out in New York or wherever, and they're smaller, like just because they haven't done that doesn't mean that they're not a phenomenal teacher and they don't know what they're doing, because some people are just better at teaching than they are like doing. Or, I mean, there are also like injuries and things that kind of like cut careers shorter that, but, so I think that those are all really, really phenomenal points. Another thing to look at is how they assess levels and like the different, so we've talked about, you mentioned point, but also flat. And like, I know one of our dancers from Okinawa, they were just over yesterday visiting, and she was out of point shoes for like 6 months at least, because none of the other girls in her level were in their point shoes yet. So they did like build up her feet and strengthen them even further, so it was beneficial for her. However, questions to ask and how they assess levels, like specifically, what are some specifics that are good to ask for that?
For one of the things that I had a dance mom in Okinawa message me about this, and she's not much older than Lexi, and she was asking, and I told her this. I said, you need to find out how they plan to assess her, because are they going to look at her age and immediately put her into a ballet level strictly based on her age and not based off of what she can do?
I mean, I think it's also like, how do they assess levels? What are they asking your dancer to do? Do they want them to come to assess them? Do they want them to come and take a class? Are they just going off what the level your dancer was? How are they? Do they want them to see them privately? Do they want them to take several mini classes? How are they placing your dancer? And if it's kind of one of the like, oh, well, like, they're 10, okay, and they were in a level, whatever, 8-year-old studio. Well, they're probably here in probably this level.
So just go ahead and register them for that level.
Go ahead and register them for that level. If they do not want to see your dancer, and specifically your older kid, I'm not talking about your 6 and under, right?
Yeah. Those can pretty much drop in like.
Yeah. And they're not, and you say, oh, well, they've been dancing on point for 6 months. That is a very nebulous statement, because there are some kids that are dancing on point for 6 months, look like they've been dancing on point for 3 years.
Right.
And there are some kids that are dancing on point for 6 months, looks like they've been dancing for a day and a half.
Look like they're little deer, baby deer.
They still have baby deer. So, and that does not mean one dancer is more talented than the other, right? That just means one took to it in a different place. So you want them to evaluate and assess your dancer in like everything, everything they're going to take. Tap, jazz, lyrical, contemporary, whatever it is, you want them to like, okay, well, they're this and this and this and this and this. And most of the time, if they are a level whatever in ballet, they are that level across the board.
Right. Unless they're starting a new style, and then that's
starting a new style, but you don't want them to just like randomly assume that,
Yeah.
Well, we'll see them in ballet and then we'll just place them everywhere else. Yeah. Abby would be in beginner hip hop.
Yes, Abby would be beginner.
If they were to be like, oh, well, Abby has to take everything, and she's a level, I'm just going to throw a number out there. She's a level 5 in ballet. We'll put her in advanced hip hop. That would be a mistake.
Yes, that would.
It would be really funny, though.
It would. I mean, she's improved, but like at their studio now, their level for ballet is typically one higher than for everything else. So they go down a level for all the other things. But something that you said, one thing that I love about the new studio, and that we tried to do at OSPA especially, is when studios say like, look, your child is a little bit beyond level 3. However, they really need X, Y, and Z before they move up to 4. So let's keep them in here. But, and this is going for the more serious route. Let's also add in a couple classes of the 1 or the 2 or whatever, wherever that foundation was like missed or not strong.
Right.
And like putting them in there. I feel like that's kind of a good indication of like, yes, we welcome your child to take these lower levels to strengthen whatever their weakness is and move them ahead that much faster before we move them up.
It's not a negative thing. It seems like it. It really does. But it's not a negative thing to have the opportunity to go back and take those, because it is an opportunity. It's not a punishment. It's a chance to go in and make yourself and your kid, yourself if you are the adult doing this, or just the kid who's listening right now, or your child, to go in and get that core. Just like in our bodies, everything comes from our core. So in dance, if your core is not correct, none of your extremities are going to be either.
Yeah. Well, and I think it shows the instructor that you're serious and you want to get better when you are willing to like humble yourself and take a lower level. Like, yeah, you've done everything to work up, but you're not better than where you used to be unless you have those things perfectly. So, yeah.
I really like seeing the older, more advanced kids and take lower level classes. Because and as a dancer, I liked doing it, because the more advanced you get, the harder the combinations get, and then the more advanced you get, you start adding like beats to those combinations. And then your brain is like, what? And then also the teacher just kind of expects you to know it. There's like very little demonstration and things like that. And then they're like, oh, okay, are you guys good to reverse it? So now reverse that combination I just taught you. And you're like, sure.
Right.
Yeah, okay. But in, the lower level classes, if a correction has been given to you, like you really need to work on your turnout, or you need to get like more solid port de bras, like your port de bras is really like struggling. You need to work on that. You need to work on like whatever corrections you've been given are so much easier to apply in a class where the combinations are fundamentally less challenging. And also the teacher isn't really going to focus on you in that class. The parents, they need to focus on the kids in that class. So you are typically in the back, you're at a bar by yourself, you're typically in the back, and you can look at yourself in the mirror the whole time and not get in trouble. And you can
Right.
apply the corrections that have been given to you in other classes because your brain is not thinking about the combination.
Right.
You're thinking about your turnout, your port de bras, your whatever. Because you're taking a class and you're being instructed, but you're also being largely ignored.
Yeah.
Not in a negative way. You're not being ignored in a negative way, but like the teacher's there to teach the level 2, 3, whatever level kids.
Yeah.
Right. Real quick.
Yeah.
The mini trial classes are good. If you have the opportunity to take more than one trial class, give them the chance to do that, because the first one, your student, your dancer, has no idea how this studio is going to run their class. So they're going to walk in and they may not have a good showing the very first time because they're trying to figure out the lay of the land just as much as anything else. So if you have the chance to take more than one trial class, give them that opportunity.
Yeah.
Classes that they offer for each level. This is something that and
each
this
age level too.
each age level, yeah, because you may go from a studio that they offer lyrical and hip hop to starting at 6 or 8 years old, and then you go to another studio and just assume they do that, and then they don't. But that might be what your child really loves,
Mhm.
and that's a big thing. You don't just assume that all studios are going to offer it, because they may not. And that might be for multiple reasons. It's not the area they're focusing on. They just don't have a teacher for that type of dance, whatever it is. Look online or ask those questions. If they show it, so some of the studio pages will show that they have hip hop and dance and tap and they have jazz and whatever, but it may not tell you what ages they offer those classes in their little blurbs. So you need to find that out if that's what you're happening with. If they have tap and jazz, is it a combination class? Is it a single class, one tap and one jazz? Or are they put together? Or do they combine jazz and ballet or tap and ballet, or whatever. For the littles, that's pretty common because it's really hard to keep a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old's attention on one style of dance for an hour. Like, it's really tough. And conditioning. This is one that it wasn't until we were in Okinawa and Zoe got old enough that we I really realized how much, and I knew that she needed it, but how much it needed to be done across all levels. And it doesn't need to be a workout for an 8-year-old, like a strong one, but they do need to start learning how their body works. And then as they get older, into actual leveled classes, I feel like this is an important thing. But is it part of their class, or is it a class that is offered separately?
Yeah, well, I like it when they offer like PBT, progressing ballet technique, or when they offer a conditioning or a Pilates class. I really like to see that they are doing something. I really like to see, and I probably would if it was between two studios equal. The teachers have equal like level of good training, like all things equal, but one studio has conditioning or progressing ballet technique or Pilates or something like that. If that is something that they offer on top of other things, I would probably pick the studio that offers that over the studio that doesn't. Just because it shows that they are invested in their dancers, like whole cross train. Because they need to cross train, and everyone will admit that they do need to cross train. And if a studio has the ability to offer that, not every studio does, and studios that do not have that ability are wonderful, amazing, great studios where your kid can receive really, really fantastic training.
Right.
But if we're talking like it's the choice between two studios and everything is equal, I would pick the studio that offers cross training over, because this is what we're talking about, right? Like how to pick a studio.
Yeah. Right.
Narrow it down to two. Yeah. They're the same. One has cross training. I'd pick the one with cross training.
Run with cross training.
Well, and like kind of like piggybacking on that one and something you said, and having those additional classes to better the dancer in all forms and strength and weakness, whatever. But how many classes do they require for certain levels, or like what additional classes do they require in those different levels? Because that's like we had at OSPA, you had to take like 3 ballet classes to take a point class or something like that. Gosh, I can't even remember now. But there are those different like requirements of how many classes you have to take for specific styles and levels because they are more intense.
Yeah, and
So
it's
I think
also
that,
for parents who aren't dance parents, like my mom will admit this. She would have no idea why, and she would just look at that and be like, "That's
Mhm.
just extra money." And
Yeah.
it is for the roundedness and the safety of your dancer, though, too. There are so many muscles that are engaged. Okay,
She
wait.
just did it again.
How did you do it?
It's just this. I
It's
just
just
held it
this.
up forever because I was like, we have 2 minutes.
It's only working on yours. Why is it only working on yours?
I'm special. Me and Brian over here, we're
I
special.
know. Oh, poor
I want,
Brian.
it to happen to me so bad.
I know. We've got the
hold
balloons
it
are
up there
popping up.
forever.
Sorry, everybody. So what happened is Lacey put her fingers up and the balloon showed, and it only works on Lacey's, and it doesn't work on the rest of ours. So with that, coming back around.
So I don't know where we were going with that.
So in terms of like training, right? Like you're looking at training for your
Right,
kid.
right, yes.
So in terms of like point training and just additional training as your dancer gets older, safety is the main thing, and you want a studio that wants your dancer to dance as safely as humanly possible, right? And you want to see that they're not like, oh, your kid can be on point and take one ballet class. That is not enough to keep your dancers' muscles and their technique consistent enough to safely dance in point shoes. If your dancer is a purely recreational dancer and they like dance and they want to take one ballet class a week, that is fantastic. And you still want to get them in a studio that has good training, but all they desire is one ballet class a week. Great. That's good. You want a studio that will allow that,
Mm-hmm.
But when your dancer wants a more, wants a higher level of training and wants to take their dancing further, you want to see that they are requiring enough classes for that to be done safely. Especially when it comes to point work, because an injury in point shoes can be catastrophic. Like if they are incorrectly dancing in point shoes and they break a growth plate in their foot, that is it. They are done.
That's it.
They're done dancing forever.
Yeah.
And not just like, oh, they're done dancing on point.
No.
There is no more dancing.
They can't do a lot of different things if that happens.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and one of sorry.
And a lot of parents think that it's like a money grab, right? Like, oh, you want my kid in 4 dance classes a week so they can have point shoes. Well, I want your kid in 3 ballet classes and a point class because that's what's required. That, in my experience, is what I feel will keep your dancer in dancing shape. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that like your dancer needs to be
in shape,
tall and whatever. I'm saying in the appropriate shape and continue to build and grow the muscles that they need for dancing. They need to be dancing this many hours a week and using those muscles, right?
Right.
I mean, it's like working out. You can't work out once a week and be like, I'm good.
Yeah.
And expect to see growth and results.
Yeah.
That's like a really great point. It's letting parents know like it is literally for their strengthening of their feet and improvement.
I'd also like to add, I know that we're like focusing like ballet heavy because that's kind of like our focus and our kids, like that's like my passion was ballet. Ballet is not every dancer's passion.
Right.
It's just not. And that's completely fine.
Yes.
You still want to find a studio, and it doesn't need to be a ballet centric studio,
right?
But you want to find a studio that at least requires like ballet technique or a ballet class, because ballet is the foundation of all dance. So as you get into those higher levels, you want to find a studio that they don't need to have like the Nutcracker. They don't need to have 56 hours of ballet. That's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. They need to have a foundational ballet as a part of their requirement for whatever your advanced dance is, like be it jazz, be it contemporary, be it lyrical, whatever. Because without the ballet technique, your dancer will not progress. Yeah. Again, I'm not saying you need to take 6 hours of ballet a week. maybe it is one, but you want to see that even in the studios that are not ballet heavy, that they do still offer it, and that to be a part of their team or their whatever, their competition, whatever, that they need to take at least one ballet class to keep that foundation going. And if they're like, nah, ballet, whatever, take it, don't take it, I probably wouldn't send my daughter to that studio or even suggest that studio, no matter how many competitions they've won or anything like that, because they need to be foundationally solid. So yeah, I just want to add that in, because I know we keep talking about ballet because that's where our hearts and our passions lie. That's just not where everyone's heart and passion is, and that's totally fine. Dance is for everyone and for all different types of people. And yeah, I think it's really important to just know that they don't have to take 8 million ballet classes, but they do need a foundation in ballet, because we're talking about picking a studio. And there's some just amazing, phenomenal contemporary studios and competition studios and all that. But you still want to see that they have a good ballet program.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the other questions I didn't think to ask and we didn't talk about, because you told me where to go and it didn't matter. We were going where you said.
And you're compliant, and I love it.
Exactly. You tell me what to do and I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it away. Just when it comes to this podcast and being here, you do what Katie and I tell you.
And it works out well.
Again, triangle. Anyway, when is recital, and if you have one, or the costs, the expectations, if it's required. For some studios it might be for certain classes or not. Personally, because Abby is at the level she is headed towards that professional path. If we're still here, she'll still be with the studio. She's not going to do recital next year, because it actually goes all of the prep is through June, and the recital is at the very end of June. So that takes away a lot of time for her intensive. And she could be at a 6-week intensive, and now it's been cut down to 2 weeks, just based on all of those movements and things. So when is recital? And then if it's required, what requirements, and then the cost and what's expected, and when those commitments are required by, and tying into that, the seasonal productions, how many, what levels.
Moving along to hygiene. Please help your children. Teach them hygiene
at a young age.
Yes.
Teach them at a young age that they need to have clean feet, because feet stink.
And
teach them about, deodorant, whatever kind you
washing
for your children, but make sure it works. And washing.
Yes. Washing everything that can be washed. Shoes cannot be washed. Please do not wash their shoes. Point shoes.
They're the canvas ones.
Even some of those cannot be washed. They will either shrink or they have leather in them, and you can't wash those either. Pay attention to what can be washed. Point shoes cannot be washed. Don't go with it. There's only one kind of point shoe. Don't
leave them in your car.
Don't leave them in your car. That is a really big thing. They need to be aired out after class. All shoes. This goes for all shoes, because it will make them crunchy and will break them down. All shoes, but especially point shoes and any shoe that is going to hold on to moisture. They need to be aired out after class so that they can dry correctly. Point shoes and other flexible ones that are very temperamental to weather and hot and cold, don't leave them in your car. It will break them down faster, and then you're spending $150 every 2 weeks or more to buy them, because your child ruined your point shoes.
And then I would throw in leotard and tights also. Wash them every time, especially if they're dancing a lot. And you can extend the life of your tights if you don't put them in the dryer and you hang dry them. Same thing with your Leos. I definitely don't suggest that. And you can hand wash both of those things as well. But
at the moment, you can't see the point bar or the ballet bar right behind me, but most of the time it has ballet tights and leotards hanging from it. Hand washing those is great, but you still need to do it, because they need to know, especially if they get to a studio in which they are using the studio's costumes. They need to be hygienic, because these costumes cannot be cleaned up the way that we could clean other things. But they also need to probably have, and this is throwing it out, out there isn't really part of this, look into undergarments for when you're sharing a costume. This is not about a studio, but it is something you need to know. Are they going to be, are you going to be owning your costume? It's etiquette. Are you going to be owning the costumes that they're using? And if not, and then the care for those. If not, you need to remember that other kids have worn them, therefore you want to protect your child, but that also means you want to protect the next child because they're going to be sharing them. It's not to be gross, people. These costumes are very expensive and they're not worth trying to. They're so expensive. Our studio here. Our studio here uses the same tutus for all of them, but they create special overlays that they can tack onto the top, and then they remove that overlay and replace it with a different one. It is really cool. They do a great job, and they even did it with the bodice, so they do it all on horsehair or tulle or whatever matches, so that it works. But that means that the girls who and the men, if you have those who are using them, they need to have proper hygiene and they need to take care of those costumes. That's part of etiquette.
Well, and phenomenal advice that was given to us by a seasoned dance dad was to ensure the dance wear and the tutus and those things,
like, especially if you're traveling. That is brilliant, especially if you're traveling for dance competitions. That is yeah.
Well, and that brings us into like the serious dancing. So we've talked about competitions and people are quite familiar with them. I mean, Dance Moms is a show that people have at least seen clips of
or
whether
heard
they
of.
watched it or not. Yeah. Competitions for dance, like that's a known thing. Intensives, I had no idea what intensives were. And then all of the girls are doing videos and I'm expected to do something with it. I don't remember what it was. And then I had to start learning about it. So intensives, we can let Amelia talk about it really quickly, but they're not all created equally.
No.
And some of them, like the one Abby went to last year, was like 5 times the price of the one she'll be going to this summer, but not of the same caliber. So I don't know how all that works, but anyway.
So summer intensives are dancers' times to try out different ballets, right? And it's when big ballets open their doors to students and they get different training. It's a good way for your serious dancers to get their name out there, to have the experience training under different choreographers and different teachers. It adds to their dance resume, especially because dance intensives are not something you just sign up for, except like at your local studio level. Typically an audition is required. And from there you're placed in a level, and that depends on how good you are. And it really is, there's not any amount of money that can make your kid be placed in a different level or anything like that. It really is purely like merit and talent based. And it gives your dancer an opportunity to learn from actual professional dancers, because typically the summer is professional ballet's off season, and that's when the professional dancers will train the new generation, the next generation of dancer. And beyond it being a really good opportunity for them to learn from someone else, it really does pad the resume. And they will learn new and different skills. And maybe also a teacher, that's been giving them a correction for so long and it just hasn't stuck. They get a correction from this other teacher and it sticks. And it is intense. It's hours and hours and hours of dancing every day instead of, 3 or 4 hours after school or whatever. And typically they come back stronger. They come back with, new friendships and a different appreciation for the art that they love so much. And that's kind of what a summer intensive is. I really recommend them for dancers that are super passionate and professional and dancers that aren't. I think all dancers should go to at least one.
And what age do you suggest they start going and auditioning for the bigger ones, like not at their home studio? If especially, like, let's do just in general, but if they're on the professional path, like at what age should they start going and auditioning for outside intensives?
12, 13.
Yeah.
Okay, so 12 or 13 is like when you need to start looking at outside studios and doing multiple auditions to be seen by these bigger companies to get a
It
down the
it might
professional
also
path.
be around the time that you realize whether or not your studio is going to work for your dancer. Not saying that
Mhm.
people should be looking for new studios at that point, but if your studio is not, and Amelia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but with that moving, if your studio is not encouraging your dancers who are looking to do this more to go out and do additional training by other people during the summer, then you might want to reconsider whether or not that's where they need to be. Because even if they
Mhm.
do their own summer intensives or their own workshops, you are only getting the same training over and over. Yes, it may change by
Yeah.
level, but it's think about this in college. If you know you have to go for a master's in whatever your career is, most places don't want to see that you're getting your master's at the same place you got your undergrad. They want you to go out. So just like she was saying with instructors earlier,
Mhm.
you don't want to go to a studio that they don't go out and get experience somewhere else before coming back to give that experience to you. Then
That's kind of like a warning sign then.
I would see it as that being that from the
Yeah.
parent side. Amelia, do
Yeah.
you feel differently?
I would say it's a warning sign if they're discouraging it. If they're
Okay.
like, no, we don't do that. We don't want our dancers to do that. I, I, and again, this is like personally, I want studios that want their dancers to get additional training, right? That's not saying that they're like, yes, leave us forever, but that when opportunities arise, the studio encourages it.
All right. Well, with all of that, Amelia, do you have a random recommendation, a dance related or otherwise?
It's not like a thing, but I'm going to say it anyways because this is the only thing I can come up with right now. My random recommendation is to learn to do an appropriate ballet bun and then
That's a good one.
Yes.
to
Yes.
teach your child. It
Yes.
is, as a dance teacher, infuriating and it like feels disrespectful to have a kid walk into class with like a giant donut bun in their hair and their hair coming out and stuff like that. Falling out, not and their bun not being able to stay. And I'm not saying your 6-year-old needs to be able to do a perfect ballet bun, but your 10 plus, they need to be able to put their hair in a ponytail and do a ballet bun.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to practice that at home, and that's fine. But they need to be able to do that themselves. And for your kids that are younger, you need to spend 30 minutes and figure out how to do it because it seems hard, but it's not. Learn how to do an appropriate ballet bun if like ballet is the path that your kid is taking. And if not, figure out whatever the uniform requirements are, whatever the hair requirements are, and have your kids show up in that.
Yeah.
And it just have the thing clean, have whatever it is, I'm not saying it really truly is one of those things that just feels so disrespectful as a teacher. Like, I don't care about you and your rules so much that I'm not gonna do this.
Yeah.
And that is like it's such a simple little thing. That is my random recommendation. My second recommendation is don't get tights off Amazon. Just spend the $25, get the good tights, like hand wash and or delicate wash and then dry them, and then you will not like your kid will not be the kid that shows up with like half their rear hanging out because the tights have a giant hole in them because you spent $8 on tights.
Okay. So my random recommendation is Anastasia Beverly Hills Makeup. I really like the eyeshadow. It gives really like thick and beautiful coverage with not a lot, and so it works really well for stage makeup. And their mascara, I really like their waterproof mascara. It looks good, and it's expensive though, so that's like competition makeup or older kid or adult makeup, not for the younger kids. I wouldn't let like my 10-year-old wear it for competition even.
So this one is for point shoes specifically. Get the perfect fit toe pad creation kit, the mold your own toe pads, because these do they they work right, but they do the opposite of what a typical toe pad does. Rather than putting padding on your hot spots, they fill the dead space and therefore move everything to the dead space, all the pressure to that, rather than on your hot spots. Especially for those who have bony feet, I have found that this works really well, and it worked wonders for us. So that is
amazing.
Perfect fit. That's what I recommend.
Cool.
I'm gonna add a random recommendation specifically for dancers really fast.
Yeah.
There is no better way to show your dance teacher that you are, especially if you've like moved to a new studio, or you go to a summer intensive, or you have a new teacher or anything, that you are respectful, ready to be in class, and like listening, and attentive, and just well trained. And I tell all the girls this, I do not care if not a single other kid in your dance class does this. Especially when you go to like a master class or a one-off class, when you enter the studio, find your teacher, eye contact, curtsy. You don't have to say anything to them. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to say anything. They could be talking. Just like make sure that they see you, curtsy, go do your thing, right? When you leave class, again, you don't have to say anything. A thank you for class is really great. But when you leave, before you exit that studio, eye contact teacher, curtsy, leave. If you have had a guest teacher, one of the best things that you can do to get yourself noticed, truly, is at the end of class, go up to the teacher, curtsy, and say thank you very much for class. And that's it. Like, you don't need to bother them. You don't need to do like anything like that. And I'm not saying it'll bother them, but like that is one of the things that'll make you stand out. And it's studio etiquette that I think is kind of getting lost, but that a lot of instructors and guest instructors really, really appreciate. And then also, like, it's something that should be expected in your class. And I'm not going to chase you down and make you curtsy to me. I mean, when I'm teaching you to do that, I absolutely will.
Right.
I mean, the girls know I stand there and I'm like, hello, 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 you know, and then they curtsy. But it's like, that's respectful. And that is a really good way to stand out, to just do it.
Yeah.
And even if no one else does it and it's not your studio etiquette, do it. Because you wanna look like the Golden Star student.
That's the way to do it.
Awesome. Thank you for listening today. We hope that you found some content, advice, or information that was helpful to you. Make sure that you follow us on Instagram and Facebook at the Virtual Compound Podcast, and hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening to us so that you never miss an episode.
Looks like crab fingers.
Sorry, it is 100% looks like crab fingers. You're right. All right, Lacey, start us off.
Everyone abandoned me, and I can't talk about this alone, you guys.
I know. I'm sorry.